I've put up our meeting agenda here. This goes over the bullet points of what we'll be covering here today. Again, we'll be starting with an overview of the waistband regulations. We'll be talking about what that means for haulers in particular. And then I want to spend a lot of time talking about the new waistbands that'll come into effect on November 1st of this year, and talk about, also what that means for all sorts of different types of haulers, what, the compliance obligations might be, but also the collection opportunities that may represent from a business growth perspective, and also talk about the available infrastructure and outlets that we see for some of these materials. And then I'll also spend some time talking about information and assistance resources that are available to haulers in Massachusetts. So again, my name is John Fisher. I'm our Deputy Division Director for Solid Waste at MassDEP. Before I get into my slides, I want to highlight a couple things about Zoom. I think probably a lot of us have participated in Zoom calls by now, but a couple things to note. You can ask questions or make comments in a couple different ways along the way. You can use the raise hand function in Zoom, and I'll keep an eye on the participant list as we go, and keep an eye out for raised hands. You can also type something into the chat. So type a question into the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that as we go as well. And then I'm also happy to unmute people along the way, and you can raise any questions or comments verbally that way as well. And I'll try to take some pauses along the way as I get to sort of different stopping points and transition points in the agenda to give people an opportunity to ask questions at any of those points along the way. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started here and move forward. So, who is this meeting for? It's for entities that do some type of waste hauling in some shape or form, but this can be quite a lot of different types of business activities and quite a lot of different kinds of companies that we're trying to talk to here today. So you could be an existing hauler who hauls either solid waste, recycling, or food waste, or some combination of those materials. We're talking about any size company, from a nationwide company down to someone who owns one truck. We're also talking about potential new haulers. So if you're looking to get into any of these lines of business, this is important content for you. Or if you're in some kind of other collection activity that may not traditionally be thought of as waste hauling, such as junk collection or doing house cleanouts, that becomes really important for some of the waistband materials that we'll be talking about, some materials like mattresses and textiles in particular. So those are some of the entities we have in mind in our meeting agenda here today, and I hope this content will be useful for you. So if you don't know, the waistbands are regulations we have in place in Massachusetts. So these regulations restrict the disposal, the transfer for disposal, or the contracting or transport for disposal of any of the waistband materials. The initial waistband regulations started way back in 1991, and we have been adding to those over time as we've gone. So a lot of materials have been added to the list of banned materials over time. So the goals of the waistbands, really what the waistbands are about primarily is putting forth a regulatory framework where we can drive investment, we can build infrastructure growth, we can drive job creation by ensuring that a consistent material supply is available to recycling businesses or composting businesses that are seeking to take in a certain material as feedstock. The waistbands also help us to conserve limited disposal capacity. We have very limited disposal capacity in Massachusetts and in the Northeast region. Probably many of you are very well aware of that dynamic. So everything that we can do to pull materials out of our solid waste stream and develop other capacity to manage those materials is going to help reduce the strain on our disposal capacity going forward. And then in our solid waste master plan, we have very aggressive waste reduction goals, and the waste bans, along with a lot of other supporting strategies, and I'll talk about a number of those today. The waste bans are a really important part of our program and policy approach to try to meet those waste reduction goals. So the waste bans apply in a little bit different ways to permitted solid waste facilities, to waste haulers, and to waste generators. And again, the key language in the regulation: no person shall dispose, transfer for disposal, or contract for disposal or transport of any of the restricted materials. So today we'll obviously be focused primarily on what the waste bans mean for waste haulers, but we'll also be talking about a little bit about how these work at solid waste facilities, and also how we approach the waste bans with waste generators. So I'll be talking more about each of those aspects of the waste bans as we go forward here. So I want to quickly review the materials that are part of the waste ban. So these are the materials that are banned from disposal in Massachusetts. So again, this may be very familiar to some of you, but for others of you, you may not know these details. So I want to make sure everyone has the base information that you need to know about the waste bans. So we ban the following materials from disposal in the trash. So recyclable paper includes paper, cardboard, and paperboard. The notable exception here is wax-coated cardboard. So we've bolded that to highlight that for you. That is actually not banned from disposal, but all other cardboard and recyclable paper and paperboard is subject to the waste bans. In addition, glass, metal, and plastic containers are banned from disposal. We also have bans on leaves and yard waste, commercial organic material, which is food material and associated material from large business and institutional generators. I'll talk more about the commercial organics ban and the thresholds for that ban in a few minutes. We have certain construction and demolition materials that are banned from disposal: asphalt, pavement, brick, and concrete, metal, clean gypsum wallboard as opposed to demo gypsum wallboard, and then wood, which wood is banned from disposal at landfills only, not banned from municipal waste combustors. The bans also include lead acid vehicle batteries, cathode ray tubes, which are found in older televisions and computer monitors, white goods, which are a range of your typical household appliances. We've listed here the typical items that are included within the scope of white goods. We ban whole tires from disposal at landfills, but not at municipal waste combustors, similar to wood. And then beginning in November, we'll have new bans that take effect for mattresses and textiles. And like food waste, I'll be talking quite a bit more about the mattress and textile bans as we go. Let me just pause here and see if I've got any questions being flagged. Okay. I don't see anything yet, so I'm going to keep on going here. Again, if you do have questions or you just want to raise your hand, feel free to raise your hand or type your questions into the chat in Zoom. I'll be happy to take those along the way. So one thing that's also important to understand is how MassDEP approaches waste ban compliance and enforcement. So the primary way we do this is we conduct inspections at solid waste facilities, which could be a solid waste transfer station, a landfill, or a municipal waste combustion facility. And we observe loads that come in, look to identify loads that have significant quantities of any of the banned materials, and then look to work both with the facility staff and haulers to identify the source of those loads and then take enforcement as appropriate. We typically will only issue enforcement for a violation that we observe. However, we do send letters based on review of facility records, review of third-party inspection reports, also just complaints from the public about a lack of recycling at a particular facility. When we've received sort of patterns where we see a facility popping up more than once, we'll also often issue what we call a formal request for information letter, which could go either to a waste generator or a waste hauler, which requires a response from a facility relative to their waistband compliance. So we've been also sending letters as a waistband compliance tool. That is not an actual enforcement action, but it sometimes is a precursor to enforcement, and actually does become an enforcement action if we don't receive a response to any formal request. So that's generally how we approach compliance and enforcement with the waistbands. So most of the time when we're issuing enforcement against a waste generator. And I should clarify, when we say waste generator, we're talking about businesses and institutions. We're generally not in the mode of issuing waistband enforcement down to the scale of individual residents. So we're talking about enforcement typically against a business or institution, but there are cases where we'll issue waistband enforcement against a waste hauler. This is typically a small percentage of time, maybe 10 to 15% of our total enforcement. The types of scenarios where we would take enforcement action against a hauler include things like a hauler collecting materials that have been separated with the trash, so waistband materials that have been separated and collecting them with mixed trash. Just simply mixing trash and recycling routes in one truck. For example, take a truck that's half full with recyclables and use that to collect trash and then deliver that for disposal. That's a waistband violation. And then obviously co-collecting trash and recyclables on the same route would be a waistband violation on the part of a hauler. We have also issued enforcement to haulers for failure to respond to a formal information request. It's important to note that generally speaking, there are no facilities that can accept these so-called mixed loads. So if you collect trash and recyclables together, there are not facilities that you can deliver that material to compliant with the waistbands. And we often hear businesses telling us that their haulers tell them that they do this and that it's okay. That, with possible very rare exceptions, is not true. So if you're collecting material in that way, it's going to be in violation of the waistbands. And when we observe it, it's going to be considered a waistband violation. The only exception to that is handling facilities for construction and demolition debris. Those facilities are actually permitted to accept mixed construction and demolition debris and process it and sort it and separate out the waistband materials. So in the case of construction and demolition debris facilities, that is okay to send them mixed C&D debris, but there's no such parallel on municipal solid waste. So if you're collecting recyclables with regular municipal solid waste, AKA regular trash, that is not compliant with the waistbands, and you need to change that collection approach. So what can waste haulers do about this? We often hear this question either framed as a question or more as a comment, like there's nothing we can do. But there's actually quite a bit that haulers can do. It's true that you cannot actually separate waistband materials for your customer. They need to do that themselves, but there are a lot of things that waste haulers can do to have a positive influence on this. So one thing to do is to make sure your employees are trained and familiar with the waistbands all the way through your operations, from the point of initial sales through customer service. For your haulers, often have an opportunity to observe loads and what's in a load, whether they're at the point of picking up waste in some cases, or certainly at the receiving facility, a driver often has a chance to see the load that's being tipped on the floor. And this is a really good opportunity to get information that you can use to educate your customers. Again, that should begin at the point of sale and through customer service. But when you have, when you take the opportunity and when you take advantage of the opportunity to provide feedback to your customers on their waistband compliance, you're really helping them out. You're providing a value-added service to them, and it can really help you retain customers. One of the not uncommon responses from businesses and institutions that receive a waistband violation is to switch haulers. they're unhappy with their hauler when they receive a waistband violation that they didn't realize was a problem. So if you're able to take the information you see, whether it's from your own observations, or whether it's acting on a waistband letter you receive from a solid waste facility, or whether it's acting on feedback that you get from a letter or the communication from MassDEP staff, this is an opportunity for you to work with your customers in a proactive way and hopefully avoid enforcement. And we've found that, you know, customers really appreciate and value when their hauler does this, and does not generally do not, excuse me, do not appreciate it when their hauler does not notify them of waistband materials. So there's an opportunity to really retain customers and provide good customer service. Another thing that's really important to do is share feedback on failed loads. The more you can do that on a timely basis and frequently, it can really help improve compliance on the part of your customers, and again, help them avoid getting into enforcement in the first place. And then anytime you receive a MassDEP information request, responding to that promptly ensures that you can remain in compliance and not have issues going forward. So those are some of the things that haulers can do in the realm of waistband compliance. There are key links that are available on the MassDEP website. I'm not going to go through actually all of these documents now, but we have a document specifically for haulers. We have a guidance document about your business and the waistbands in general. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about property managers later. Property managers are often right in the midst of waistband non-compliance issues. So we've prepared some guidance for property managers in particular. And then we've prepared a growing library of guidance relative to specific materials, more recently with the commercial organics ban, with mattresses and with textiles. And we also have a guidance document on construction and demolition materials. So all those materials are available up on our website. If you're not familiar with these, they're pretty readable, pretty concise, and certainly echo points I'm making here today, but I would encourage you to take a look at those and be familiar with those documents. I also wanted to say a word about waistband waivers. Some of you may be familiar with waivers, some may not be. I think this is something that's important for haulers to understand what waistband waivers are, and just as importantly, what they are not, and how waistband waivers work. So we have a provision in the waistband regulations where we can issue what we call a waiver in the regulations, what's called an exception, that allows the disposal of a waistband of a material that would otherwise be banned from disposal. And it's typically due to some kind of narrow or short-term exception that makes that material not possible to recycle or to compost or to otherwise divert from disposal. So a waistband waiver must be requested in advance. You can't, pick up a load from a customer where they disposed of a bunch of waistband materials in the trash and request a waiver for that load. That doesn't work that way. That's just waistband non-compliance. And similarly, you can't intentionally contaminate waistband materials and then turn around and request a waiver for those materials. But if there are materials that are contaminated, and I'll give a couple of examples of the types of things we mean here, and there is no other alternative to disposal, and you can document that to us, then we can issue short-term waivers that allow for that material to go for disposal. So this is something where, you need to ensure that there's not a viable alternative outlet. Cost is in the waistband regulations and the waiver provisions, we say nothing about cost. So the fact that an alternate recycling or diversion outlet might cost more is not a valid basis for a waiver. We can only issue a waiver when there's really no outlet at all. If this happens, when it happens, we try to keep these waiver approvals issued for as short a time as possible and for as small a quantity of material as possible. And when we issue these waivers, they go to the waste generator with a copy to the hauler and the receiving facility. There's no fee to issue a waiver, and we can typically turn them around pretty quickly. Often waivers require short-term responses because it's something that's come up kind of out of the blue, usually. So some of the cases where we've issued waivers include things like where there's been a flood at a facility, a flood maybe due to, a sprinkler system going off, a fire, or just, a flood due to a storm. A bunch of documents and boxes become soaked. They're not able to be recycled. They're not able to be shredded. And a facility requests to send those documents for disposal. And, in that case, there really is no viable alternative to those materials. They're wet, they're often moldy. There's no way that can go to a recycling outlet. There's no way it can be shredded. So we'll approve a waiver in a case like that. Another example is when you have certain categories of packaged food materials. Now, a lot of packaged materials can go to depackaging, and we have a ready and growing infrastructure to manage packaged food materials. So most of the time we will direct any waiver request to a depackaging facility to respond to. And we would only issue a waiver when that depack facility cannot handle the material. And that sometimes happens with glass packaging, or it can sometimes happen with frozen material that's not able to be thawed. So those are some examples of scenarios where we have issued waivers. And just to give you an idea about what we mean by a waiver and the types of circumstances where we would issue a waiver. This is not intended to be commonplace. It's not intended to be routine. And, again, we try to keep these approvals as limited as possible. If you do feel you need to request a waiver, or you just want more guidance so you're prepared for what you need to do, if you do need to request a waiver at some point, the types of things you need to know are, first of all, what the material is and why it needs to be disposed of, why there's no other alternative. That's the core piece of information you need. In addition to that, you need to know and tell us where it would go for disposal. These approvals are facility specific. You need to know that that facility is willing to receive that waiver material, and not every facility is in all cases. So you need to confirm that first. Then we need to know the generator location and contact information, the hauler name and contact information, the quantity of material that you're requesting a waiver for, and the proposed duration of the waiver. So that's generally how waivers work. Put the two primary contacts for waiver requests here at MassDEP. You can also, though waiver requests are most frequently issued out of our Boston office, you can potentially go through a regional solid waste section chief relative to a waiver request as well. That may ultimately be issued by us, but you can certainly use the regional office as a point of contact. So let me pause for a moment here. I'm going to switch gears in the next slide to talk more about the new wastebands and the new waistband materials. And that's going to be a whole new segment of the agenda here. So let me just give folks a chance to ask any questions or raise comments at this point. Again, you can do that via the chat function, or you can raise your hand, or we actually have a relatively small group, so I don't mind if you just want to take a crack at unmuting yourself now to raise a question. That would be fine. Okay, I think we're good for now. So I'm going to jump ahead into the next section here. So last fall, we published amendments to the waistband regulations that added 2 new materials and modified an existing waistband material. So the effective date of these new waistbands is November 1st of this year. The 2 new materials we added are mattresses and textiles. And then we have an existing waistband, what's called our commercial organics ban, although this is primarily a food waste disposal ban, which has an existing threshold of generation of 1 ton per week. So if a business generates 1 ton or more of food waste per week, they need to take steps to comply with the existing ban. Under the new ban, that threshold will drop to 1/2 ton per week. So I want to take some time to talk about each of these waste bans. I'll explain the bans for each material, how they're written, kind of what the scope of the material is. I'll talk a little bit about, the different collection opportunities, the infrastructure for these materials and what this may mean for haulers, as well as, the potential business opportunities we see for growth in the collection infrastructure relative to these new materials. I also want to draw a bit of a line between what I just talked about in the previous slides and what I'm going to talk about going forward. Hauler compliance relative to the waste bans is primarily relevant and most directly relevant to haulers that collect solid waste or that collect trash for disposal. That's where a hauler really has to focus on waste ban compliance and where you have a direct role with waste ban compliance. If your role is not involved with collecting trash, if you're solely a recycling hauler, delivering to a recycling facility, or you're solely a food waste hauler, you're generally not going to be directly involved with waste ban compliance. You're certainly involved because you're providing a waste bin compliance service to businesses and institutions, but you're not going to be at the risk of potential waste ban enforcement like you would if you were a hauler delivering trash to a solid waste facility. So these are somewhat different roles for haulers depending on what categories of materials you're collecting. And in this section coming up, I'm going to focus a little bit more on haulers that are providing collection services for the new waste ban materials. Okay, so I'm going to start with mattresses. So the mattress waste ban includes mattresses as well as box springs. It includes all sizes of mattresses. It includes foam and latex mattresses. I didn't put this one point on here, but it also includes pocket coil mattresses, which we know are a growing segment of the mattress waste stream going forward. So all those different types and sizes of mattresses, as well as box springs or foundations, are included within the definition of mattress for purposes of the waste ban. What's excluded are things like futons, sofa beds, air mattresses, and this certainly does not include other things like other furniture. That is not part of the waste ban. So that's kind of the scope of mattresses that we're talking about for purposes of the waste ban. So what's important to notice or to note about mattresses is more than 75% of a mattress's components by weight can be recycled. And this includes the wooden frames, if you're talking about a box spring. It includes the springs within the mattress. It includes foam padding. It includes the outer fabric of the mattress as well. All those materials and components of a mattress are potentially recyclable. And when a mattress recycler recycles all those components together, they can achieve a very high proportion of a mattress being recycled. And I'm going to circle back to this point that 75% in all of the materials in a mattress is an important point for something I'm going to circle back to in a moment. So contaminated mattresses, we do write into the regulations that if mattresses are contaminated in certain ways so that they're not recyclable, they are not considered part of the definition of mattresses under the waste ban, and they can be sent for disposal without requesting a waiver. There are certain provisions around that, which I'll explain in a moment. But if a mattress is contaminated in such a way that it's not recyclable, those mattresses are not considered subject to the waste ban and can be sent for disposal without requiring a waiver. So the parameters of what constitutes a mattress that's so badly contaminated that it's not recyclable is pretty limited, and it's actually a very small percentage of collected mattresses fall into this category. But these could include mattresses that are wet, significantly wet, moldy, or have bed bug infestation. Generally, a mattress being soiled or looking dirty is not an issue. It's not a problem. So just because a mattress looks dirty does not mean it's not a recyclable mattress. It's also important to note that if you're going to send mattresses for disposal under the basis that they're contaminated, you have to ensure that you're maintaining them and storing them and managing them in a way so that they will not be contaminated. So if you pile up mattresses outside in the rain and then say you need to send them for disposal because they're wet and contaminated and unrecyclable, that's not a valid basis. So that would be considered a waistband violation in that scenario. So when you're collecting mattresses, you need to make sure that they're being collected in a way that minimizes and prevents further contamination. So when we talk about contaminated mattresses, we mean mattresses that you are receiving in a contaminated state. So going back to my previous slide where I said that all these components of mattresses are recyclable, and you can recycle a very high proportion of a mattress by weight. The flip side of that is that it's not okay to just grind a mattress, recover the metal and wood, and dispose of the rest. That logic where you grind it up and say, well, it's no longer a mattress, so we can dispose of the rest of it, that doesn't work. So again, that is not considered compliant with the waistband. The only way that would be acceptable is if you're talking about mattresses that are contaminated and that would otherwise be sent for disposal. In that case, you could grind them, recover the metal and wood, and throw out the rest. But if you're going to dispose of mattresses under the basis of them being contaminated, you need to maintain some documentation around that and make that available to us upon request. So that includes, how many mattresses you're receiving that are contaminated, how are they contaminated, how are you managing them to prevent contamination. So when we see a load of mattresses, we're going to be looking into this and doing some due diligence work around this to make sure that any claims that mattresses are contaminated are legitimate. Because again, overall, we believe this is a very small percentage of the mattress stream that is so severely contaminated that they cannot be recyclable. So the presumption is that most mattresses are going to be able to be accepted by a mattress recycler. Okay, so we have a mattress recycling webpage, a MassDEP, where you can go and read a lot of information about mattress recycling options, infrastructure, how mattress recycling works. We have a state contract that's, we provide a link to that up on that webpage. That contract is currently out open for rebid, and we expect to finalize that rebid process soon. So that state contract has pricing and terms where any state agency or any municipality or political subdivision can purchase off that contract under those terms. There are also potentially other mattress recyclers that are not on state contract that can still provide mattress recycling services. And that could actually be to the public sector or the private sector. So cities and towns are not bound to purchase off of the state contract. They could purchase services from a mattress recycler not on state contract as well. And in a minute, I'll be talking more about our Recycling Works in Massachusetts program. But that homepage has a searchable service provider database function where you can enter in a material and you can find service providers for that material. So that's a place to look for other recyclers that may not be on state contract. And then I'll talk about this more in a moment. We recently posted a guidance document for municipalities on all the different ways that mattresses can be managed and collected at the municipal level. I'm going to go into this more in a moment. I think this holds a lot of relevance, not just for municipalities, but for haulers and service providers. I'm going to pause here for a question. Gretchen, I see your comment in the chat. You have a question about contaminated mattresses. So if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask your question now.
Thank you, John. Sure. So I have hospitals who have told me that they have mattresses that are contaminated with bodily fluids, and therefore they don't want to have them recycled. So assuming that they are, putting them in a corner, stacking them up, I'm going to guess that they should not be put through a transfer station, which is, how they used to go, but how should they now be heading directly to, would the DEP prefer a waste to energy versus a landfill? Is there a preference there, first of all?
If it's going to go for disposal, it's there's not a distinction under the regulations between waste to energy and landfill. So it's really a question of which facility would be willing to accept them, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
The only other thing that I'd want is confirmation from a mattress recycler that they consider those mattresses non-recyclable.
Okay.
Because it may not necessarily be the hospital, I guess it's a matter of severity, but it may, the hospital may think they're not recyclable, but in fact they may be.
Okay. I also am going to be looking into things like plastic liners to make sure that we can't be, covering them up with plastic and therefore reducing the soil contamination level, Okay. Yeah. So okay. That answers my question. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about mattress collection options. So there are a lot of mattress collection options. So yeah, sorry, I just see Brooke's comment here, which was echoing that point. Yeah, that's, I would agree with that. Most mattresses are contaminated with bodily fluids at some point. This does not render them unrecyclable. Only brand new mattresses are going to be pristine. So I think that's getting back to, my comment that you might think a mattress is not recyclable, but probably most of the time it is. Unless you're talking about something that's, really excessive or significant. Most mattresses, they do not have to be pristine to be accepted by a recycler. So yeah, I think the nature of the beast is that a lot of mattresses have bodily fluids of some sort at some point, and that's most of the time that's okay. So mattress collection options, there are a number of different ways a municipality can go, and there's a number of different ways a hauler can go. And this is one of the things that I think is a really important theme of this meeting here today. And we really wanted to, open up this meeting to a wide and diverse set of haulers, because there are opportunities here, there are niches, and there are, unrealized collection needs that haven't been met yet. And there's a lot of flexibility with how this can be done, but I think that also creates a lot of opportunities. So this document that we just put up on our website lays out all the different ways that a municipality could potentially manage mattresses and collect them from their residents. So this could include a curbside collection service with a waste or recycling hauler. It could include a collection done by municipal staff. It could take an existing bulky waste collection program or an existing white goods collection program and add mattresses into that program. Generally, that should be okay, as that's generally a dry waste stream. And those materials can typically be readily separated out. A mattress could be readily separated out from bulky waste or white goods without getting contaminated in the load. And then, go to some type of handling facility or transfer station where it could go be tipped in an area where it could be managed separately. That could be a perfectly compliant way to manage mattresses in compliance with the waste ban without potentially needing to add a separate collection for mattresses only. Another option that we've seen come about quite a bit with food waste is where a municipality could establish an agreement with a vendor to provide collection service to its residents, but that this would be done directly between a hauler and a resident. So we've seen this happen with like a subscription collection model for food waste a lot, where residents sign up voluntarily with a food waste composting service. This same type of approach could happen with mattresses, where the municipality doesn't necessarily have to have a contract for mattress collection, but they could say to their residents, call XYZ company, and they'll come around and collect your mattress for X price. So a municipality could establish an agreement with a hauler to provide service to its residents along those lines. And then the other option for municipalities to say, we're not going to collect mattresses, we're not going to accept them in the trash. If you have a mattress you need to get rid of, you call up somebody on your own and you can decide who that is and who's going to provide your mattress collection service. From a compliance standpoint, that's perfectly acceptable as well, as long as one way or another they are being kept out of the trash stream. There are also drop-off collection options that could be put into place for mattresses. So a municipality could have a drop-off center. This could, be a municipal like recycling center or transfer station. We've also heard the idea mentioned of municipalities partnering with a charity collection program to collect mattresses. That's another potential option. There's also been models where a municipality participates as part of a regional collection program. So there's a collection center that's shared among residents of multiple municipalities, or the model of a milk run type collection where each municipality collects a number of mattresses on their own. This would typically be intended for smaller communities, and then makes an agreement with a hauler to do a periodic milk run to collect across those municipalities. And then another model that's come up is a one-day collection event type of approach along the lines of a household hazardous waste event where, one day in the spring or one day in the fall or something like that, a municipality enables residents to drop off mattresses on that particular day. So there are a number of different approaches that we've come up with. There may be others, there may be variations on these themes that may be also okay. But these are, all the different approaches that we've thought of so far that could work. They involve, different levels of municipal involvement, effort, and cost. So there's a whole spectrum of options here, depending on how involved the municipality wants to get, from a full-on collection program specific to mattresses to just simply excluding them from the trash. And I think what's important here is because of all these different collection models, whether it's these drop-off models, I'm going to go up to the previous slide for a second here, or all these curbside collection models, there's roles for different haulers to step in here and play a role. So you don't necessarily have to be, a municipality's contracted trash hauler to play a role with the mattress collection service. That may be the case, that might be how it works, but there's lots of other models that can work here as well. So I really want to, make those in the hauling community aware of these dynamics. Municipalities are continuing to think about what's the best way to go with this. Many have mattress collection programs that have been set up already. Most of them supported by a MassDEP grant, but others have not and are still thinking about what path they want to follow here. So, there may be opportunities for various different haulers to step forward and help the municipality and their residents providing collection service for mattresses. So there's a lot of different models to think about here, and be happy to talk about this or hear people's thoughts about these different options as we go. So that's mattresses. Let me pause there and see if there's anything else. We certainly take mattress comments and questions later as well, but let me just pause for a moment, see if anyone else has anything they want to ask about relative to mattresses. I don't see anything here, so I'm going to keep on going into textiles here. So textiles, the way these are defined in the regulation, so this is not just clothes. So this is clothing, footwear, bedding, towels, curtains, fabric, and similar products. Again, with a similar exclusion, as we said, for mattresses. So textiles that are contaminated in such a way that they're not recoverable, not reusable, not recyclable, are not considered subject to the waistband. One example that came up through our public comment hearing process are things like wiping cloths or shop rags. Those are certainly not subject to the waistband. Those can go in the trash like they normally would. So we're talking about textiles that are, ready, clean and sufficient quality and condition to be able to be recovered. Again, like mattresses, there's probably a greater tolerance here than most people think. Textiles can be worn, they can be stained, they can have holes, they can be ugly. It doesn't really matter as long as they're basically clean and dry, so not oily or wet or contaminated in other ways. So again, like mattresses, probably a lot of textiles that you might not think have value actually do, and actually can be diverted to some form of recovery. If a textile recovery organization or other generator is dealing with material that seems to meet the requirements or the definition of the waistbands, would normally be subject to the waistband, it's not contaminated, but for some other reason, it's not recoverable, they should reach out to us and talk to us about that. We certainly want to, do everything we can to help someone find an option. Again, whenever possible, we want materials to go to an option, even if it's not the cheapest option. But if there's simply no alternative for a category of material, we can work with an entity to give a waiver to allow that material to go for disposal. And we're certainly open for doing that where it's appropriate. So if you're in that specific situation where you have those types of scenarios you're not sure about, we always encourage more communication rather than less. We're not going to take enforcement against someone because they reach out to us with a question or concern. So if you call us and talk through a scenario, we can make sure, we come to the best solution for everyone. So in general, and this would actually hold true for all waistband materials, if you have questions, I always encourage you to reach out to us sooner rather than later. That's going to end up working out the best for everyone, including you. So feel free to do that if you do have questions that you're not sure about something, and maybe it's a more narrow question than you want to raise on this call here. Always happy to talk to someone offline another time. So if you're looking for infrastructure and outlets for textiles, we have right now a directory. It's called our Beyond the Bin Recycling Directory. We're actually working on updating this and moving this to a new platform soon, where we'll be sharing more information about that as it evolves. We're also looking to gather and share more information on textile recovery organizations directly up on our website. That's in process right now, and we expect to have more information to share about that soon. And we'll certainly keep people updated about that as our information evolves. Again, our Recycling Works Massachusetts program has the same searchable service provider database for textiles. So you can go in there and search for textiles and look for companies that have said they will accept that material. As with mattresses, there are a number of different ways that textiles can be collected. Municipalities often get involved. It could be a drop-off, municipal recycling drop-off center. I know in my community, we have a great drop-off program at public schools with textile collection bins. There's certainly charity and private drop-off boxes available. There are private and charity collection programs for textiles along with other household goods. And then in some cases, communities have worked with service providers to set up separate curbside collection programs. And then another really important collection channel that's not on here is a textile collection channel per se, but I think it's really important in this realm for both mattresses and textiles is house cleanouts. So I alluded to this a little bit earlier. House cleanouts that go to disposal facilities are subject to the waistbands. So if you have waistband materials in those containers, you need to be working on a system to figure out a way to separate those or keep those out. So that could be metal, scrap metal, it could be cardboard, it could be yard waste, it could be clothing, it could be mattresses, all those things, CRTs, tires, all those things are potentially subject to the waste ban. And if those are being collected as part of house cleanouts, you need to make sure that you work with your customers to make sure that that material is being managed in accordance with the waste bans, and you're figuring out a way to separate that out and manage it separately from other waste that is going for disposal. So even though that's not a textile collection option per se, or a mattress collection program, we realize that a lot of this material is going to wind up in those cleanup type loads, and it's going to need to be separated and not go for disposal. So that's textiles. Now I'm going to keep going with food waste here. I do not see any questions at the moment, so I'm just going to keep on going ahead, but I've got the chat box open here, and I've got my participants tab open, so I'm keeping one eye on those as we go. But now I'll turn to the food waste ban. So a lot of you probably know already that we have an existing food waste disposal ban where any business or institution that generates 1 ton or more of food waste per week needs to take steps to divert that material from disposal. Beginning, and I should also say, by the way, we estimate that's roughly about 2,000 entities that are subject to that ban. So common types of entities: supermarkets, large grocery stores, food processors and manufacturers, hotels and convention facilities, colleges and universities, large restaurants are among those that generate 1 ton or more of food waste per week. So beginning in November, that threshold will drop to 1/2 ton per week, and we estimate roughly double the number of entities that will be subject to the new waste ban. So some of the common questions and answers that come up, and we have a much more detailed question and answer document on our website, but this does not count residential food waste from residential sources. So if you have an apartment building and there happens to be collectively a lot of food waste in that load, that is not subject to this waste ban. So there's an area where there's a little bit of a spectrum with residential and institutional food service. So areas like senior living facilities or colleges have both residential environments as well as commercial food service environments. So the way that works is that any residential food waste from apartments or college dorm rooms, that is not subject to this waste ban. But if you have a dining room, a kitchen, that is a kitchen that services a communal dining room, that is considered subject to the ban. That is considered commercial. And if the food waste coming from that portion of the facility is going to exceed the threshold, those types of entities need to take steps to comply. And if you are working with a chain or say, public schools that have multiple locations, the food waste generation and the threshold is determined for each individual location individually. So you're not adding up the food waste across all the multiple locations. The 1 ton now and the 1/2 ton per week beginning in November is determined for each separate location separately. And the other note is that to comply, that does not mean that you have to divert 100% of your food waste from the trash and dispose of nothing. It means that you simply have to get the disposal down below the threshold amount, which means you can kind of pick and choose, depending on how much food waste you have. You can potentially pick and choose different compliance options that will get you to a compliant result. So some of the entities that we think will be subject to the reduced threshold, the largest number are going to be restaurants. There's one caveat there that, I know a lot of restaurants have changed over the past couple of years. First of all, a number have closed, but also those that are still operating, may be operating at a reduced volume, or they may be operating much more in a to-go mode, which may mean that they generate less food waste than they would have otherwise. But we still expect a number of restaurants to be subject to the reduced 1/2 ton per week threshold. In addition, smaller grocery stores, we think some portion of those will be subject. Larger public schools, we think will be subject. but a relatively small number. We've estimated probably about 30 of the largest public schools will generate enough food waste to exceed the half-ton per week threshold. The other note is that there may be some businesses out there that are complying with the 1 ton per week ban, but may need to achieve further reductions to comply with the half-ton per week ban. So the clearest example of this is if you have a food service entity that has established, back of the house collection of food waste in the kitchen, and that has gotten them below the half-ton per week threshold, but or below the 1 ton per week threshold, but that may not be sufficient enough to get them below the half-ton per week threshold. So that type of entity may have to now think about other steps that might potentially include front of the house food waste collection. It's also important to note from a hauler perspective or any service provider perspective, there may be opportunities to serve smaller businesses below the waste ban threshold or even residents on the coattails of this ban. So even if those businesses aren't subject to the ban with the 1 ton ban, we saw a lot of businesses below that threshold sign up for food waste collection services. And we think that's going to happen with the half-ton threshold as well. We do have a food waste estimation tool up on the Recycling Works website. I provided a link to it here. And this is an example of some of the factors that are in there for restaurants. So this is for estimating Can people hear me now?
Yes.
Back.
With me for 1 second. Something got disrupted there. Okay. And is my presentation visible again?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, sorry about that. So this shows one example of the estimation tool for restaurants, which, as I mentioned, is the most common sector. I don't think you can use that right now. No, you can't use it right now. So this is the most common sector under the new waste ban threshold, but we have up there, we have similar estimating tools for hotels and supermarkets and colleges and a whole range of sectors. So this is a useful tool if you want to look at different ways of estimating food waste generation. The only caveat that's important to give with this is that these are generic sector-based estimates. Each individual business is going to vary somewhat from these estimates. So this is not necessarily a clear indicator that a business is or is not subject to the waste ban, or they do or do not exceed a certain threshold. There's a lot of variables. This is only a kind of a way to get kind of an order of magnitude type estimate of food waste generation. And I'll talk more about Recycling Works in a minute, but the staff at Recycling Works can certainly work with individual businesses to do more specific kind of business specific food waste estimates as part of their services. Okay, so there are a lot of different ways to comply with the food waste ban. So a business can comply through any combination of these options. So a business could take steps to prevent food waste and reduce the amount of food waste that's being generated in their kitchen. And in some cases, if you're right around the threshold, that might even be good enough. We've seen some of those programs can achieve reductions of 50% or even more in the amount of food waste that's being wasted. So if you're right around the threshold, that might be enough, and you might not even need to set up a collection program. We also have a really robust and growing infrastructure in Massachusetts for food donation and food rescue. So as long as food is still good and safe to serve, it's been stored in accordance with time and temperature requirements for food service. That food can be donated to serve those in need, and that's a great way to manage food that might otherwise go for disposal. The only thing we want to be really careful about is that donation and rescue is not considered a means of managing food waste. So if you're going to send food for donation or rescue, let's make sure it's good, it's safe, it's been stored properly, and you're not going to cause problems for anyone receiving that material. But for most businesses and institutions, there are unrealized opportunities for donation and rescue, and the benefits of that are obviously tremendous. Other options available include a variety of on-site systems that you can look at, and there is a directory of these available up on the Recycling Works website. And then, of course, what many businesses do is to take food waste, separate it from the trash, and haul it off-site to any number of facilities, which could be an anaerobic digestion facility, a composting operation, an intermediate processing facility, or animal feed for a farm. And again, our Recycling Works website provides a list of food waste service providers. And we also have a list up on our website of all the facilities that we're aware of that accept food waste from businesses and institutions. So I think this is a really interesting and encouraging chart. This shows the number of businesses that are diverting food waste through a agreement with a hauler, going back to 2014 when the initial commercial organics ban was implemented, up through 2021. And we can see the substantial growth, which that's really exciting. The only year we had a slight dip was 2020, when the commercial institutional food service was hammered and reeling due to COVID. But then even in 2021, we saw a slight uptick from that. So the progress has been really encouraging. What's also interesting here is that we estimate about 2,000 businesses are subject to our current ban. So even if we're off by a little bit, there's still a lot of businesses that are not subject to the ban that have already taken steps to divert food waste, which is encouraging to see. So I think it's a really interesting slide and encouraging to see the progress that's been achieved so far. So let me, I'm about to kind of shift gears a little bit more here. So let me just pause and see if there are questions that, people have about any of the specific material information that have gone through, whether it's for mattresses or for textiles or for food waste. And again, feel free to either use the chat, raise your hand, or at this point, I think, feel free to unmute during one of these pauses as well. Okay, I think we're good. So next, I wanted to talk about some of the resources that we have available for haulers. You may be familiar with these already, but again, we want to make sure that everyone knows about these, and if you can benefit from these, we certainly want to try to help support your operations in whatever ways we can. So one is our recycling loan fund. I've provided the link to that here, and I should say, by the way, I'll be sharing this presentation with everyone after the meeting, so all these links will be made available to you. So this is a program for any type of recycling, composting, anaerobic digestion, reuse business. Provides low interest loans that can help businesses that may have a difficult time obtaining financing from traditional bank lenders. And the important thing about the loan fund is that this can be used for collection activities as well. So if you're a hauler, if you're looking to invest in a new truck or modifications to your trucks, or cart that you want to buy for to expand collection services, all of those things are eligible for funding through the Recycling Loan Fund. We also are in internal discussions right now about a potential new grant program that we hope to roll out soon that would provide for some targeted equipment grants specifically for collection of new waistband materials. So I can't promise you this right now, but we've had a grant program for facilities that are receiving materials. It's gone great, and we've had a lot of interest in funding collection activities, in particular for the new waistband materials. And we're thinking very seriously about trying to roll out a grant application for that within the next several months. And certainly, if we do, we would do quite a bit of outreach around that, including contacting all of you to let you know if there is a grant offering coming available. I've also talked a lot about Recycling Works along the way. So Recycling Works provides free assistance for Massachusetts businesses and institutions, ranging from over the phone assistance to on-site technical assistance at a business. There's a lot of resources on the website that can help businesses and institutions out. And a lot of those are focused on waistband compliance assistance. And I should point out, though, while this is really, while the program is really focused on businesses and institutions that generate waste, we've certainly had a lot of haulers call the Recycling Works program for assistance and working with their customers. So this is certainly a relevant program for haulers to be aware of as well. So this is a screenshot of the Recycling Works webpage. You can see right up on the home page this searchable service provider database that I've referred to a few times, where you can go in and put in a material from a pull down. You can enter a location, you can select pickup or drop off, and then you can search and find service providers for that material. And among other things, if you provide these services and you're not currently listed in the Recycling Works service provider database, you should be. So there's a form on the website where you can fill out your information. That's the list your business function there, and get listed. So we refer people to this website all the time. We do not endorse anyone listed on this website. It's important to know that. And we also kind of take information that's provided to us at face value. So it's kind of self-listed information. We don't promote it or vouch for it, but it's a way to go and get information about a really complete set of service providers. So again, if you're looking for a place to deliver material, this is a useful tool. Or if if we're looking to direct businesses to haulers that collect material, we use this tool as well. So it's important that you list it here. And then you can see the other just basic tabs going across the top. We have a tab specific for food waste, which attracts a lot of attention. And we have a lot of guidance within the food waste tab. We have a tab for other materials where you can select a variety of different categories of material and learn more about recycling those materials. We have a reuse tab, and then the recycle has some general guidance about recycling programs. It's important to note one thing we do have on there is best management practices for contracting with haulers. So that's something that would be good for you guys to be aware of. Another program I want to mention is Recycle Smart. So this is our Recycle Smart MA website. This provides guidance on how to recycle smart properly in Massachusetts. This is based on information from our MRF, from our material recovery facilities, about what materials they do and do not want to accept. So there's a lot of free resources and tools on there. There's a smart recycling guide that emphasizes the basics about what should and should not go in recycling containers. And then we also have a searchable material function where someone can put in a particular material and learn what they should do with that material, whether it should go in their recycling bin, whether it should be recycled in some other way, for example, plastic bags going back to a retail store, or whether it should simply be placed in the trash. So as a hauler, we really encourage you to take advantage of the Recycle Smart MA program to share it. There's an opportunity to sign up for free to become a Recycle Smart partner. A number of our haulers have done this. And if you haven't, I'd really encourage you to do that and both take advantage of the resources and tools and help share the message about what should go into recycling bins. So here's the Recycle Smart webpage. You can see towards the top, the Recyclopedia in the middle of the page. You can type in any item there and get guidance on what you should do with those materials. And then there's also the Smart Recycling Guide that's shown in the tab there, also further down the page. Tells you the basics about recycling. And then you can see the link up top to become a partner. So if you're not familiar with the Recycle Smart program, I encourage you to check it out. It's a great way to spread the word about recycling properly, which, though it may not seem like a waistband topic, it actually is, because if we don't get people putting the right material in the right bins, that can often lead to a waistband violation. So this education and outreach program is also a really important waistband compliance tool. Then, speaking of compliance, I wanted to take a moment to say a few words about multifamily and mixed-use properties. So this is an area where we've seen a lot of non-compliance, and there are a couple of reasons for that. What we end up doing here as far as enforcement is enforcement can go against a property manager or a tenant business. Multifamily housing is often either unserved or underserved for recycling, which leads to a lot of waistband violations, or sometimes there's poor performance by both commercial and residential tenants with separating recyclables from trash. And that's where both the Recycle Smart and Recycling Works and Massachusetts Assistance Resources can come into play. We've been working quite a bit with property managers already over the past 5 to 10 years here. We've had a real a growing range of interactions with property managers. We're working more and more on outreach and compliance assistance to property managers. And, this is something where as a hauler, you have an opportunity to work with these entities as well, make sure they're getting the service they should be, make sure they're getting the guidance that they need to how to properly separate materials, and make sure they're getting corrective feedback if they do have problems with either their trash loads being waistband violations, or with the recycling loads being contaminated to the point where they're not acceptable at a recycling facility. Either way is results in a similar problem in the end. Then a few other resources that are not so much directly relevant to haulers, but I just want to make sure you're aware that these are out there. We have a sustainable materials recovery program, municipal grant program that our most recent round of that just closed, but we issue this program on an annual basis. It includes our recycling dividends program, where we typically give out between $3 million and $3.5 million in assistance to cities and towns. We have targeted equipment grants. We also have municipal assistance coordinators who have assigned groups of municipalities that they work with to support their programs, and they're a great resource for our cities and towns. We have another new grant program that's under development right now. We're calling this our Recycling and Waste Reduction Innovations Grant. The specific scope of this grant program is still to be determined, but the idea is that we would use this program to fund some activities that we can't fund through our existing grant programs, things that would really improve the way that our materials are handled and managed, with the goal of ultimately driving higher diversion rates. So we expect this program to be initially capitalized at $1 million a year. We expect to be launching this sometime later this year. And then again, I mentioned briefly the idea of a grant round for collection equipment for new waistband materials. That's something we're talking through right now, and actually hope to issue some form of application for that, hopefully sooner rather than later, but again, not a done deal, so no promises there for certain. And then other information, if you're not familiar with our solid waste master plan, that's our program and policy framework for all of this. I really haven't focused on the master plan today because I wanted to focus much more on the nuts and bolts of our programs that are relevant to haulers. But The master plan provides a policy framework for everything that we're doing here and everything that we talked about here today. I also wanted to note our Solid Waste Advisory Committee. So the Solid Waste Advisory Committee meeting, we hold typically 4 meetings a year. It's a way for us to communicate to stakeholders everything that's going on across our program and policy work. You do not have to be formally on a committee to be on this. We maintain a very extensive email list. Anyone can be on this. Anyone can participate in a meeting, or you can simply get on the email list to stay up to date. If you want to learn more about that, I've included the web link to our Solid Waste Advisory Committee page. It's a good way to keep up to date about program changes at MassDEP. And then we also have 4 subcommittees or work groups across construction and demolition, organics, which is primarily a food waste focus, reduce and reuse and recycling market development. So similarly, if you're interested in any of these topics or keeping up to date on our work in these topics, and if you're not already on these lists, this is open to anyone. Again, you can participate in the meeting if you like, or you can just be on the list to get our email updates. So if you're interested in any of those, check out those web pages. We have contact information for each of those to learn how to be added to our email lists for any of those groups. So if you're looking for ways to keep up to date on what we do, these lists are a helpful way to do that. We do not typically send out a large number of emails, so you're not going to get your email box flooded with emails, but every once in a while we send out updates when we feel it's important. So if you're not on these lists and you're interested, check them out and let us know if you'd like to be added. And then to close, I'm going to recap some of the key web pages that are good for you to be familiar with in this context. So our overall wastebands page has all these guidance documents you can find there. We have a page specific to food waste as well as to mattresses and textiles. Our Recycling Works program that I've highlighted a few times has a number of resources that are available to help businesses, but also to help haulers that are servicing businesses. And then for anything that you don't want to raise on the call today, but you have questions about, you can feel free to reach out to me directly. The best way to do that right now is to start with an email. I'm working remotely at the moment. But shoot me an email. I check email constantly, and always happy to reach out and get you a quick response. And if it's helpful to have a conversation, happy to do that as well. So if there are any questions you don't want to raise on the call here today, but you want to ask me about that are more kind of specific to your own circumstances, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk about wastebands or any of these issues with any. So feel free to reach out at any point and be happy to talk further. And with that, that is all I've got. So I can, again, open it up one last time for questions or comments, and happy to entertain anything that people have at this stage. Taylor, thank you for the comment in the chat. Glad it was helpful and glad it was useful. All right. Well, with that, I will wrap things up. So just the quick follow-up notes here. I have the emails of everyone who participated here today, as well as those who I know a number of people signed up and weren't able to attend. So everyone who participated or registered, I will get you an email with all this information from the presentation here today. We'll also share the recording up on our webpage. So I'll provide a link to that as well. So if you, for anyone who is not able to make the meeting here today, you can check out either the presentation or the recording. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions that you didn't want to get into with everyone on the webinar today. That's certainly understandable sometimes. So always happy to speak with someone else at any point along the way. And I would just echo, one point I made earlier. I always feel that more communication is better. if you can reach out to me with questions sooner rather than later, it usually leads to a better outcome. So thanks again for the time. Thanks for joining me here today. And, appreciate all the work everyone does. You guys do a lot of really important work, and we hope to have the opportunity to work with you going forward. So thanks again for joining us, and hope you all have a good rest of the day.